Decades before the world became obsessed with its own image, Edgar Cayce, in a trance state of profound clarity, warned of the architects of the mirror. He foresaw a time when governance would be seized not by force, but by a figure who perfectly reflected the nation's most shallow desires and deepest insecurities. This would be the champion of ego, a towering, consuming presence built of glass and vainglory, whose entire purpose would be to hold up a flattering yet ultimately destructive reflection. His voice would not merely demand attention, it would validate the audience's self-perception. To his followers, he would be the unfiltered image, proving that their every flaw was, in fact, strength. To his enemies, he would be the grotesque reflection, threatening to drown the culture in a wave of superficial self-obsession. Cayce's chilling revelation was that this figure, this Donald Trump equivalent, was the visible consequence of a calculated manipulation, the installation of the reflective field designed to focus the nation inward, away from structural problems. The true masters were the guild of the polished surface, who specialized in managing the ethics of self-adoration. Every self-aggrandizing claim the champion makes, every moment of highly public drama, every instance of shifting blame, all are precisely calibrated moves to ensure the populace remains fixated on the surface image. And while the nation argues over the accuracy of the reflection, the hidden architects smile. The illusion of personal validation works flawlessly. The world believes a man like Donald Trump is directing the nation's political agenda, but he is merely the perfectly engineered lens, preventing the nation from looking past its own face. The vision of the glass icon. The year was 1943. Cayce's mind surged toward a time when personal image would be the only currency, and the nation's sense of duty would be tested by the worship of the self. In the vision, the seer observed the champion of ego. His aura was a fragile, high-sheen glass, reflecting the constant, overwhelming need to be seen. He stood not before monuments of shared sacrifice, but before a vast digital gallery where his every utterance instantly generated a sea of mirrored, validation-seeking responses. Below him, the masses were locked in a state of image dependency, unable to look away from the source of the flattering reflection. They saw in him an embodiment of their untapped potential, a figure who commanded loyalty simply because he loved himself so fiercely. But as Cayce's sight penetrated the glass surface, the consuming brilliance revealed its origin. It was the reflection of unchecked desire. What seemed like powerful self-belief was, in fact, engineered vanity, an emotion that was fabricated to be mirrored, not genuinely earned. His boastings were absolute, yet Cayce heard the underlying constant whir of the image engineers, ensuring his persona was always flawlessly presented, even when demonstrably false. His charisma was the lure of instant gratification, his presence the promise of a glorious selfie, but none of the destructive narcissism was spontaneous. He is the vessel of vainglory, Cayce whispered in trance, the magnetic core for those who control the very laws of appearance and pretense. Around the champion of ego, Cayce saw thick, intertwining cables of social approval metrics and cosmetic market trends, forming a hidden, immense network. These cables connected him to the guild of the polished surface, the true masters of societal image. They used him as a perfect, non-stop feedback loop, a sudden, arbitrary elevation of personal success here, a relentless demand for emotional applause there, all designed to ensure the nation's cognitive energy flowed ceaselessly toward the central mirror. This man, whom the world knew as Donald Trump, was the ultimate collector of the nation's self-obsession. Cayce realized that the new form of tyranny was the theft of objective reality. Invisible fields of competitive image anxiety, superficial striving, and the desperate urge for external approval, injected directly into the nation's value system. He is the glass anchor of superficiality, Cayce declared, his voice heavy, visibly flawless, and constantly demanding. Yet he is merely the surface mechanism ensuring the flow of energy to the unseen owners. The public was trapped between striving for the impossible image and being destroyed by the failure to achieve it. But Cayce saw a perfectly crafted optical weapon, designed to prevent the population from ever achieving inner substance. And in the profound depths of the vision, as the nation exhausted itself chasing the reflected image, Cayce heard the guild's cool, unified instruction: let them perfect the image, while we hollow out the core. The guild of the polished surface and the reflective field. The final phase of the optical deception will arrive. The prophet warned, when the people believe their purpose is to be seen. Yet the capacity for genuine, unmediated connection will already be destroyed. Cayce's vision then moved to the guild of the polished surface. They sat in a chamber defined by perfect, blinding aesthetics, utterly insulated from the raw, unedited reality they obscured. They were not political strategists, but masters of perception debt. Specialists in how to maximize the distance between the public's idealized image and their flawed reality. They spoke only of visibility metrics, vanity sinkholes, and the sustained state of performance anxiety. Their language was built on the manipulation of human validation needs, designed to ensure the population never found peace outside their system of constant appraisal. They who rule through cultivated superficiality, Cayce whispered, will ensure that the nation is too busy polishing its reflection to ever notice the foundational cracks beneath its feet. The architects of the mirror had perfected the secret. They no longer needed to control the nation's thoughts. They controlled the focus that dictated action. Their dominion was aesthetic, their power residing in the invisible, constant pressure of social comparison. They ensured that a figure like Donald Trump became the essential reflective anomaly, the irresistible point of focus for both admiration and loathing. Both emotions, equally intense, provided the raw, energetic fuel necessary to maintain the reflective field. He was the perfect, self-sustaining performance engine. The chaos he generated served as the constant, necessary distraction to drown out the internal whisper of authenticity. And Cayce, deeply disturbed by this realization, spoke the key to victory. When the people finally refuse to donate their self-worth to the image, the reflective field will shatter. The only thing that can defeat the architects of the mirror is collective recognition of inherent, unedited value. Cayce saw the climax. The champion of ego attempted one final, unprecedented demand for adoration, designed to permanently exhaust the national will. But the people, having reached the point of volitional authenticity, simply released their striving. The massive consuming performance hit an unexpected barrier. The great internal acceptance. The glass and vainglory figure stood alone, his projected image failing to find the necessary external energy for maintenance. The architects of the mirror were defeated not by fighting their reflection, but by achieving unmediated self-acceptance. The sudden silence that enveloped the man signaled the turning of the tide. The performance ceased for the last time. The prophecy was clear. The true path to freedom was not fighting the image on its own terms, but by cultivating a sense of completeness so profound that the surface reflection held no magnetic power. The builders of the core would rise, and their construction would be the unbreakable, unedited soul. The Mirror Directive. Prophecy of the Collective Reflection, Part II. The climax of authenticity. The shattering of the reflective field. The champion of ego exerted his final, most public display of self-aggrandizement, attempting to force a national crisis of image validation that threatened to erase all objective truth. The guild of the polished surface pushed the glass anchor, the Trump figure, to demand absolute, total, and unquestioning adoration, believing that collective exhaustion from performance anxiety would finally force the population to surrender their authenticity for the promise of external approval. But Cayce foresaw the profound failure of vanity. The masses, having suffered through years of cognitive dissonance and emotional bankruptcy caused by striving for the impossible image, reached a point of volitional fatigue. They realized that the pain of perpetual comparison was greater than the fear of being seen as they truly were. The volitional authenticity began, not with a rejection of the leader, but with a simple, simultaneous refusal to edit the self. The builders of the core emerged from the periphery, guiding the populace not to attack the mirror, but to recenter their own self-worth entirely internally. Their core teaching was the principle of unmediated value. Your worth is not derived from the gaze of others. The mirror needs your validation. You do not need its reflection. Cayce saw the physical manifestation of this spiritual shift. The cables of social approval metrics and cosmetic market trends that tethered the champion of ego began to snap. The glass anchor's consuming demands, his relentless need for applause, suddenly met no resonance. He became a figure defined by the sheer unreturned echo of his own self-praise. The lack of validation caused the reflective field to shatter, revealing the true fragility of the core. The collapse of the champion's power was the moment the nation became truly free. Free in self-expression, free in time, and rich in inner substance. The builders of the core, the new architecture of value. The society that emerged from the shattering of the reflective field was meticulously engineered to uphold unmediated authenticity. The builders of the core formalized their philosophy into the directive of inherent value. The decentralization of gaze. The concept of a single, central figure, the source of all approval, was dismantled. Cayce's wisdom was enshrined in the new civic design. Value is not conferred, it is acknowledged. New social structures were built around horizontal, reciprocal recognition rather than vertical, competitive striving. The idea that one person could anchor the national ego was replaced by the collective understanding that every person was their own anchor. The currency of substance. The new economic and social model prioritized resources that could not be valued by image, skill, integrity, communal contribution, and emotional depth. Industries built on performance anxiety or cosmetic striving, the engine of the guild of the polished surface, became culturally irrelevant. The highest societal value was placed on contributive authenticity. The sense of worth derived from simply being real, entirely independent of digital appraisal. The architecture of acceptance. Physical and digital spaces were designed to induce honesty and genuine connection, not external comparison. New social platforms adopted anti-vanity protocols, algorithms that actively suppressed filtering, self-promotion, and high-contrast imagery, prioritizing raw storytelling and vulnerability. The frantic image editing culture of the champion of ego era was replaced by the acceptance of unfiltered reality. The psychological scars left by the era of the glass anchor were healed through widespread communal practice. Therapy of the reflection became central to education, teaching citizens to recognize the subtle internal feelings of self-alienation that the architects of the mirror exploited. By embracing the self at its source, the unedited, flawed human being, they made the external image entirely inert. The final destiny of the architect of the mirror. The guild of the polished surface suffered the ultimate consequence: rejection by the gaze. They who understood only how to profit from the reflection had no capacity to operate in a world defined by internal core value. They could not sell image, nor could they force comparison. Their highly complex systems, designed to manage aesthetic debt, became useless relics in a truly self-accepting society. Cayce's final, profound words on their end were simple. They starved because the audience finally chose to look within. They dissolved, not as villains, but as obsolete psychological manipulators. The memory of the champion of ego, the glass and vainglory figure, remained only as a historical lesson in mass psychological vulnerability. His existence was studied in the context of how a society's collective narcissism could be weaponized to prevent structural self-correction. His name and the trauma of his era were used as a constant reminder that the greatest threat is not a powerful image, but the internal gravity of unearned praise. The ultimate lesson of the mirror directive was etched into the new global consciousness. True power resides not in the ability to project an image, but in the unwavering ability to acknowledge one's own authentic, unedited truth. The world became irrevocably defined by its internal core, finally free from the compulsive, exhausting pressure of the eternal reflection. The mirror directive was utterly defeated by the power of the unedited soul. The final stage of the societal revolution, as detailed in Cayce's most abstract trance readings, was the complete institutionalization of internal value. The builders of the core understood that mere cultural change was insufficient. The very structures of governance and economy had to reject the principles of external validation. The new legal framework established the right to be unseen. This unprecedented right legally protected individuals from mandatory digital profiling, constant performance monitoring, and mandatory participation in the visibility economy. Companies that attempted to track citizens' movements, consumption. The education system underwent its most profound transformation, centering on the curriculum of integrity. This program, mandatory from childhood, replaced competitive testing and external ranking with self-assessment metrics, SAMs. Students were taught to measure their progress based on personal growth, effort, and contribution to collaborative projects, entirely removing the pressure of peer comparison and institutional judgment, the very fuels that powered the champion of ego. Rejection of the perfect image. History lessons used the Trump era not as political instruction, but as a cautionary tale on the danger of confusing visibility with credibility. Students analyzed how a figure built of glass and vainglory could successfully seize power simply by catering to the audience's hunger for a simplistic, aggressive self-image. The focus was on identifying the structural vulnerability in the public mind. The sovereignty of skill. Professional fields abolished the concept of personal branding. Advancement and recognition were tied exclusively to verifiable, substantive skill and demonstrated ethics, making it impossible for those relying solely on chromium and charisma to ascend. The external appearance became irrelevant. The internal capability was everything. The global de-escalation of appearance. The victory over the architects of the mirror was not localized. It triggered a global cascade of de-escalation. Nations previously burdened by massive military and economic spending, driven largely by the competitive anxiety that the Guild of the Polished Surface engineered, found their motivations dissolving. The need to project an image of ultimate strength or flawless prosperity evaporated when the core culture rejected image entirely. Cayce's final words in this phase described a world turning its energy inward. The resources once poured into image projection, military displays, corporate aesthetics, aggressive advertising, were redirected to internal maintenance, infrastructure, environmental restoration, public health. The Guild of the Polished Surface attempted a final, desperate move. They launched the Phantom Beauty Crisis, flooding the world with hyper-realistic, AI-generated images of impossible perfection, hoping to reignite the toxic cycle of self-comparison and striving. The builders of the core responded with the directive of shared imperfection. Communities celebrated visible flaws, aging, and human variance as markers of authenticity and experience. They developed digital tools that automatically blurred out perfection in images, restoring the natural chaos and honesty of human reality. The Phantom Beauty Crisis failed because the audience was now spiritually immunized to the lure of the edited self. The culture of the unedited soul. The cultural landscape transformed profoundly, embracing the aesthetics of honesty. Media of substance. News coverage prioritized slow journalism, focusing on the complex processes behind events rather than the emotional drama of the surface. Investigative reports often included the journalist's own learning processes and inherent biases, treating objectivity as a difficult, achieved process rather than a claim of authority. The end of the celebrity industrial complex. The phenomenon of the champion of ego was understood as a tragic side effect of an unhealthy system. With the decentralization of gaze, the industry that fed on creating and destroying icons collapsed. The energy once reserved for public worship was redirected to local mentorship and mutual respect. The art of rawness. Art and performance were valued precisely for their vulnerability and lack of polish. Performances included deliberate mistakes, Films showed unedited human emotion, and writing focused on the difficulty of truth rather than the certainty of claim. Cayce's legacy was the understanding that the most resilient society is one that is comfortable with its own flaws. The architects of the mirror had controlled the world by making people fear their own reflection. The new world thrived because it found unconditional peace in the complexity of its own unedited core. The victory was complete. The soul was finally free from the tyranny of the surface. The final, enduring success of the builders of the core rested on their ability to design systems that would actively sustain authenticity, even when the painful memory of the champion of ego's tyranny began to fade. Cayce's last lessons emphasize that any truly lasting structure must be self-correcting and resilient against the inevitable return of psychological warfare. They formalized the principle of temporal honesty. This societal compact decreed that all historical narratives, all public accounts, and all communal records must acknowledge the biases and flaws of the creators.